Hi everybody, today I'm going to address the question whether there's anything that you can do in an off-the-rack corset to change the curvature of these backbones here. When you're looking at this corset, you can see that it goes pretty straight from top to bottom, which is potentially great for supporting your posture. However, when you look at a skeleton in the sagittal plane and you look at the spine, it's not going perfectly straight. It actually has some natural lordosis in the neck and a little bit of kyphosis in the thoracic region, and then a little bit more lordosis in the lumbar plane, and then more kyphosis when you reach the tailbone area. So healthy upright spines are not supposed to be stick straight. They're not supposed to be at, say, 0 degrees like this corset might make you feel. So if you have lumbar lordosis that is more than the average person, you might find that wearing a corset with a very stiff back, they might actually feel like they're hunching over this way because the corset is forcing them into an unnatural posture. And people who have a very prominent bum, like an apple bottom that sits rather high, they might find that the bones right in the very bottom of the corset would rather just stick into the tailbone or the bum area as opposed to curving nicely around it. So is there anything that you can do about that? Well, when you have bones in the back of a corset, it's usually like this, and it comes rather straight because it doesn't come pre-bent in the corset. It is meant to flex back and forth. So if this corset were to properly support your spine without forcing it into an unnatural position or posture, then theoretically the bones should be very slightly bending like that in the lumbar area. A few corset makers do accommodate clients who have a large amount of lumbar lordosis or a high shelf bum. Particularly the two that pop into my mind right away is Electra Designs and Lovely Rats, because the Corsetiers behind them, Alexis and Amber, they both have a case of lumbar lordosis themselves, and they know specifically how to draft for it. And many other corset makers prefer to use bones in the back of the corset that are less stiff than this even. They're more bendy. When you work with very bendy bones, there are certain precautions that you have to use, such as making sure that the bones are very tight in the channels and making sure that you have enough grommets and even lacing it in a different way, just to make sure that those bones aren't going to twist and bend because they are so flexible. But I do notice that in my corsets that do have quite bendy bones in the back, even though I might have to lace them a little bit differently, I do find that they are much more comfortable than bones that are very stiff in the back, because it allows me to keep my neutral, healthy posture. But what if you can't afford to go custom? You just have an off the rack like this. The bones in the back are way too stiff for you. It's not comfortable for you. Is there anything that you can do? Yes, and I'm going to show you right now. Okay, so here's the corset, and you can see that the back edge of this is lying quite flat on the table. And so what you want to do is to add a little bit of curve in there. Now, when I was inspecting this, I noticed that the boning channel is almost twice as large as the width of the bone itself. The width of this bone is about that, and then there's this much space. So if you want to tighten up those boning channels, you're absolutely welcome to. You can take a zipper foot or a cording foot and just stitch a line beside that bone right there. Or what you can do is you can open up the binding, remove the bone, sew a line so that you don't run the risk of hitting the bone and breaking your needle, and then put the bone back in. But for the case of this video specifically, I'm not going to go to that. So step one is to try on the corset as is and figure out where you're getting the most stress in your back and where approximately on the corset you have the most natural curve to your spine. So I actually have this already lined out for you. You might be able to see that. I'm going to show you this on half the corset because it's just easier to hold in my hands, but preferably you would want to do both of these at the same time so you don't have one set of bones that's curvier than the other. But this is what you do. So you figure out where on the corset you need the most curve, you mark it out, you take it in your hands, and don't blink here because it goes really fast, just watch carefully. Bend. That's literally it. Just bend it a tiny bit at a time, extremely gently, maybe just a couple of degrees difference each time, and then try on your corset again, see if that helps. If it doesn't, keep on bending. Don't do this too quickly at once because it is possible to permanently kink the boning, and that would not be comfortable for anybody because we are not geometrically shaped. But just a tiny little bit at a time, very, very gently, trying to make a very smooth, rounded curve in the area. And if your problem is more the tailbone but not the lumbar area, then you would try it just at the very end part here, and you would gently try to just curve it upwards a tiny bit so that you have a little bit more space for your tailbone and bum area. If you need some leverage, you can use something semi-soft like this tailor's ham here and bend it over there. Or some people just bend it over their knee. One thing that I do not recommend though is bending this over the corner of a table. Once again, we do not want geometric angles in here. That would not be comfortable. And if you were to accidentally permanently kink the boning in a certain place, you would have to take out the bones and replace it. That being said, a very important note, make sure that you are committed to keeping this corset, because if you're manipulating the corset in any way or altering it, even if it's just a case of bending the bones, that could render your warranty useless, because if you decide that you don't like this corset and you send it back, you're not sending it back in the original condition. So make sure that, you know, this is a corset for keeps. So here's what the corset looked like before I did any sort of modification or bending of the bones, and here is what I came up with afterwards. So the most amount of lumbar curve right there is just below the waist tape on me, and I also added a little bit more of a flip right at the very bottom to kind of go over my tailbone and my bum area instead of digging right into it. You know, if you were a little bit overzealous and this is way too much for you, all you need to do is to gently bend it back in the opposite direction. But once again, try to bend it in the same area as you had bent it before, because you don't want the bone getting all like ziggly. And then once again, with the corset laced almost shut, you can see this is before and this is after. So you can see how it's no longer lying flat on the table. So it's a little bit more human shaped in the spinal region there. So after doing the same thing to the other side so that both sides of the corset matched here in this curvature, this is what it looks like when you're wearing it on. So you might not notice that it looks terribly different, but for me, it feels incredibly different. For instance, I don't feel that I'm hunched over in this direction anymore because it's not pushing on my lumbar area and forcing it to be straight. I also feel that in the bottom here, it's no longer pushing on my upper bum or my tailbone area because it's just flipping out very gently and curving around the upper edge of my bum there. So I feel that I'm able to tilt my pelvis in a way that feels more natural to me. And even though the corset does not extend all the way up this thoracic region or up to my cervical spine here, I feel that when things down below are a little bit more in alignment, things just tend to stack up a little bit more. So before, I had a tendency to have a slightly forward head posture in this corset because of the way that it was almost like forcing me over. And now I feel a little bit more vertical. A couple of observations when I'm wearing this corset with the newly curved bones in the back there for an extended amount of time. One, I feel less tired just when I'm sitting or standing, probably because my muscles are no longer fighting the corset to keep a proper posture. Secondly, you guys know that I have this really weird hip here that likes to go numb, and there's pinching issues there, so I have to be careful in certain types of corsets. And when I bent the bottom of this corset here so that it flips out and curves gently over the bum instead of poking into it, I noticed it took some pressure off of the sciatic area. I'm going to mention that this is not a perfect science, so just do it a tiny bit at a time and then try it on for fit, see how it feels on you, and just keep going, like just bending it just a tiny bit at a time and keep trying it on until you find a point where it fits you most comfortably and that you feel that your posture is most neutral. And not everybody is going to have the same amount of curvature either, and that's perfectly normal. When I was doing my research, it was mentioned in a couple of different sources that the normal range was between 40 degrees and 60 degrees for lumbar lordosis. So don't worry if your corset might have to be bent a little bit more or a little bit less than somebody else's. Same with any sort of problems in the bottom here. If you have a higher bum or a lower bum or a more prominent bum or a little bit of a smaller one, that can totally affect how your corset fits. Also know that some people's hips are shaped differently. So while one person might have broader hips but a little bit of a flatter bum, another person might have a bit more prominent bum and more narrow hips. But because of the way a corset is drafted, it may fit the two completely differently. So if you're a person who has a very prominent bum and you may or may not have narrow hips, you might find it comfortable to actually add hip gores right in the very back by those back grommets to give that corset a little bit more of a kick in the back to round over your bum as opposed to digging into it. So I hope this has helped some of you. If you have any other suggestions on how to tweak an off-the-rack corset to accommodate for your spinal curvature, let me know in a comment below, and I will see you guys next week for another review. Bye.